Designing outfits is something I really enjoy doing, and what I also really like is Genshin Impact. And in this video I'll talk about some illustrations where I combined both these things. I decided to design some modern outfits for Genshin Impact characters. I already did a project similar to this one some time ago where I designed outfits for 9 Genshin Impact characters, but this time I did it for 23 characters in total. And you see I just designed outfits for the male characters. In this video I'll talk about the process and how I approach a bigger project like this. When I then move on to talking about each character, since there are 23, I decided I would share one tip or something I learned from the current illustration. I'll show 2 characters side by side, since I often chose poses and sometimes also the outfits so that they would match in pairs. First, let's start talking about the overall process, how I prepared for this project. For the poses, I just took some random ones I saw in my own sketchbook. Sometimes just draw poses to practice or study references. When I then sorted the poses to the characters, I tried to make most of them work in pairs. And when I later on drew the poses, I sometimes also used 3D models with the app Magic Poser to see if the anatomy of the pose I drew works. I often like to try drawing a pose on my own at first and then see if it works and what mistakes I made by using a 3D model and kind of correcting myself that way. Then for the outfits, I first created one big mood board, and from this I then took some images as references for each character. Before even drawing the characters, I also decided on basics of the outfits to make sure I would include a variety. This is what you see me draw in this time lapse. And then I also sometimes kept in mind that I wanted outfits to work in pairs, especially when it comes to the color palettes. And now let's move on to talking about the characters. I'm sorry for all the parts I didn't record in the time lapse. I have automatically recording turned off, since I often draw where I don't record a time lapse to save on some storage on my tablet PC. And that's why I sometimes forget to press record. You'll be able to see that I overall use the same steps of sketching, line art, flat colors, shading, and finally coloring the lines with all the illustrations. The first pair I'll talk about, Ayato and Thoma. For Ayato I tried lots of color variations. Since his pose was from the side, it was interesting to make sure that the outfit would also look nice from the side. The tip here would be that when you're adding jewelry to an outfit, it's good to decide between gold or silver, depending on if the outfit is cold or warm. For cold outfits you would choose silver jewelry, and for warm outfits gold ones. All my tips are just guidelines. You shouldn't think of them as rules you have to follow, but things you can keep in mind. For Thoma, I used the pattern from his outfit in-game for some of the accessoires, and I also added a headband to resemble this headpiece he has in the game. The tip here is a bit similar to the one with Ayato. It's that for the pants, you can see I chose a warmer tone of blue. When you're choosing colors in outfits or in illustrations in general, it's always important to look at what other colors are there in the image. Is the overall temperature warm, cold? But since these 2 illustrations should work in pairs, actually having both outfits be in different temperatures makes it a bit difficult when you, for example, want to put them and then choosing if the background should be warm or cold. Blue or brown in this case, for example. Now let's move on to the next 2 characters. For Kaya, the tip I have is if you want to make an outfit appear more fancy and cooler, you can add some flowy things like bells to it. I did this very often in these illustrations. And also you can see how the hair, the belt and the jacket sleeve all follow the same line of movement. This makes the overall illustration come together. And this is also the case for different parts of the outfits. The other jacket sleeve, the belt around the leg and the other belt at the shirt. Then for the look, you see that on the outfit I added a small print of his constellation in-game to the hoodie. And the tip here is that for especially modern outfits, it can be very helpful to just go for very simple colors. You can see here that for both Kaya and Diluc, I only used white, grey and black, and then one color. For Kaya this purple and Diluc red. Now let's move on to Razor and Bennett. For Razor I wasn't sure how to do it, but I wanted him to wear a hood, but then also have his long hair still be visible, similar to how it is in Genshin Impact. I imagine the jacket he wears is cut in a way that makes this possible, even if it's not really something you'd see with casual outfits. This is also something I want to mention in the tip for him. Since your drawing and what you draw doesn't have to actually be working in reality or realistic, you can make outfits and any other things, even the anatomy and so on, different from how they usually be or work. Of course, if it's your goal to be anatomically correct or to design a clothing piece you actually want to produce in real life, this is different. Now for Bennett, I tried lots of color variations and I knew I wanted to use brown, white, black and maybe blue, but not in which way. The tip I have here is about adding text to an outfit. Often prints on clothes include text, and some advice I have for this is if you are adding text, you can get inspired by what you're drawing. For Bennett, you can see I included Clover since he's unlucky, and for Razor Claw since he grew up with wolves. For the next two characters, for Ether, the tip I have is that when you're picking colors for an outfit, it's good to make sure it isn't too close to the skin color. And here the shirt for Ether is at the borderline for me. Including clothing that's similar to the skin color can be confusing when you first look at the illustrations, except for if it's your goal to draw clothes with skin color. For Hazo, the tip I have is that if you're drawing accessoires like belts and so on, and even long hair, if it looks too simple or flat, you can do this thing where it changes the perspective. So you basically see the upper lower side of it, the front and back side. I can show you some examples here of what I mean. Now let's move on to Chongyun and Xingqiu. For Chongyun, the tip I have is that if you're unhappy or unsure with the face of the character you're drawing, what you can do is in the sketching phase keep the old version and then draw one or two completely new ones, even if it's in the same perspective. Often you see that there will be one of them you like the most, and by repeating you often get a better version. This doesn't always have to be the case though. And since Chongyun's my favorite character, I also include a bonus tip here. For more complex outfit pieces like the shoes, and here you can first draw it in the perspective that is easy for you. For me this was copying the shoe from the reference, drawing it in the perspective in there. And once you've drawn it once, drawing it again in the perspective of the body and visualizing how the outfit piece would look in a different perspective becomes easier. Now for Xingqiu, the tip I have is that when you're drawing folds, they are almost never parallel. You can see that from the tension point at Xingqiu's right shoulder, folds go outwards from there in different directions, and this also applies to the rest of the outfit to have different directions of folds. I kinda messed this up though at the left torso, and there you can see that there are two folds that are almost parallel, and to me this looks a bit off. For the next two characters, first we have Child. You can see that at first I just included a simple jacket and pants, and the tip I have here is if you have an outfit that looks pretty basic, you can just layer more outfit pieces with different lengths underneath or on top of it, and this can make it look more interesting. Here I added a second layer of the jacket which was longer and made the outfit a whole lot more interesting to me. For Zhongli, I drew him after Child, so I placed Child next to him to figure out a nice flow for the jacket so that they both would look good side by side, but I still found drawing the jacket difficult. The tip I have here is that especially for capes and flowing fabric, for outfit pieces like the jacket in here, having a guideline how its silhouette should look can really help. You can see how I used this wavy line to have both the jackets work together. Now we move on to Kazuha and Scaramouche. I'm sorry if I'm spelling any names wrong. The tip I have for Kazuha is that when I was preparing the outfits, I already made sketches of the types of accessoires I wanted to include. Just having some of these on your canvas can already help when later on drawing the outfit. And adding things like the socks, the bag and the cap can make a pretty basic outfit look special. Kazuha is just wearing a pretty basic t-shirt, a long sleeve shirt and short pants, but through adding the different accessoires, it looks more interesting. And I have a similar tip for Scaramouche. If you want a more interesting outfit, go for something not symmetrical maybe. You see he has this one-sided jacket-like thing, and the shirt that he wears also has this cut at the right side of the arm but not on the left. You can also apply this tip to adding accessoires to have earrings or wristbands on one side only. Now we move on to Xiao and Venti. With Xiao's mouth, at first I kept it open, but I decided to close it later on. And I also noticed that when I drew this, his head was very big in the beginning. The tip I have for him is something you can apply when you're shading and you use a similar approach to me, having different colors be on different layers. When your colors are similar, and here you can see there's lots of black and gray, you can only make one layer visible at a time to focus on only shading that part. Overall, focusing on one outfit color at a time when shading makes sense, especially when you have a cell shading style, since you then are only using one color to shade and you don't have to switch between colors all the time. And for Venti, something kind of funny actually happened. I had this one outfit piece on front of the upper body which looked like a face to me, and once I saw it I couldn't unsee it, and it was bothering me since I knew that every time I would look at the outfit my eyes would immediately go to this and I would have to laugh. I couldn't take the outfit seriously anymore, so I decided to get rid of this thing at the end. The tip I have for him is, you can see I added a cap. When you're drawing a headpiece like that, I first suggest drawing the hair, or at least the head underneath, and then adding it on top. By drawing the hair as well, you make sure the position as well as the size of the cap works for the character. Now we move on to Saino and Tighnari. And for Saino I struggled with drawing his feet. I'm not good at drawing toes since I draw them very rarely. The tip I have for him is, you see that I drew an indication of abs since his shirt was cut short. And for this I like to use a different brush. Also when, for example, drawing an indication of the chest muscles or something like that, I like to do this and not just use line art or shading to portray it. This depends on your own stylistic preferences, of course, but for me I like to use a brush that has a bit of a texture and less opacity. It's actually the same brush I use for patterns on outfits, so I don't want to outline them. For example, when you have print on clothing, I use this for the font on Saino's shoes here, for example. I'll also show some different examples from the other illustrations. Then for Tighnari, you can also see that I use this brush on the patterns of his sleeves. The tip I have here is something applicable to character design. You can see that the hair and ear color of Tighnari is different from the outfit colors, and this is something I in general often noticed with Genshin Impact character designs. The hair colors always fit to the outfit, but it's slightly different from it, which puts more emphasis on the head. You can use this for your own character designs. When you have a color for your character in mind, it can be good to use a different version of the color on the outfit than the hair. Now we move on to 3 characters where I didn't draw the poses in pairs and I just drew them separately. For Albedo, I added a pattern on his shirt in the end since the outfit was too boring for me. I didn't record this unfortunately, but I like that I added it. The chest in the final illustration looks too flat to me. The neck was too far to the right from the beginning. This is also what I will mention in the tip. It's to make sure that the neck is really in the middle between the shoulders and that you include a proper volume for the chest when you're drawing upper bodies. This is something I used to struggle with a lot since anatomy knowledge is very important for portraying this, but it really makes a big difference when you're drawing any kind of character and you're showing more than just the head. Then for Ito, you can see I used the pattern brush I mentioned in Saino's tip for his tattoos as well. The tip I mentioned here is the importance of foreshortening with poses. Depending on what kind of focal length the camera you would use in your illustration or just the perspective overall you draw your character in can change how extreme the foreshortening is. Then you can also stylize it to fit your illustration so that it looks nice. It doesn't have to be completely accurate. The example of foreshortening I have for this illustration is in the arms here especially, and the hands. You can see the difference of the size of the right and left hand and also the length of the forearms. Now we move on to Goro, and his tip has a bit to do with the previous tip. After drawing the pose I decided to draw for him, I also tried to pose like him myself, and I figured out that for me having my back be as straight and lean back as it is in this pose is not possible. You can also try this out yourself and comment if you're able to pose like this, but afterwards I still decided to draw the pose like this, even if it may not be accurate to how the human body can stretch or bend. And this is what I mean by stylizing poses. Sometimes to me this pose overall looks nice and I don't think that it looks wrong, like the body is deformed. So if you just want to draw a nice pose, you don't always have to be anatomically correct, except for if your goal is to draw anatomically correct, of course. You can also comment how this pose looks to you, if it's weird to you, or if you, like me, didn't even notice it would not be possible for many humans to pose like this. And finally, I move on to two characters that at the time of making this video are not playable yet, but I basically included all the male characters that were there at the time, and I also wanted to include these two since I find their character designs pretty cool. For Al-Haytham, I at first was unsure if his head should be tilted upwards or downwards, but I decided to go for the downwards angle. And similar to Zhongli, I struggled a bit with making his jacket flow so that it would work together with the pose. And like with Ito, this is also a good example for foreshortening with the arms. The arm and the back might be placed incorrectly to me though. And the tip I mention in this illustration is if you want to spice up the lighting a bit in your illustration, you can add a rim light on the outside of the character. You can see that I did this with the hair for all characters I drew here, but for Al-Haytham I also added this kind of small light on the jacket and pants a bit. This especially helps when you want to separate a dark character from a dark background, but it can also just work as a nice add-on if you use it in a way that doesn't seem very unrealistic. And finally, for Dainsleif, I liked how the anatomy of the pose worked and I kind of wanted to show this in the final illustration, but then I also wanted to have him wear a big jacket. So what I did was to have the jacket be cut so that the leg would still be visible, and this is also what I mentioned in a tip for him. If you're looking for inspiration on how to design an outfit, what also can help is looking at the pose you're drawing your character in and then ask yourself, what of the anatomy I want to show? After answering this, you can come up with an outfit that works for this purpose. And now I'll quickly talk about how I finalized all of the illustrations and added backgrounds to them. Before I added the backgrounds and so on, I changed up the faces of all the characters really. I want to be transparent with this since I can imagine some artists struggle with similar things like I did when finishing the illustrations here. I wasn't happy with how the faces looked by the end of drawing all the characters. This often happens when I do a series of illustrations over time. What I was learning a lot about at the time and focusing on improving while drawing all of these illustrations were my faces. Because of this, I decided to fix all of them at the end to make them look more like the way I want them to look. And this can be dangerous since it can lead to you spending way too long on illustrations if fixing them in the end takes very long, and it also can be frustrating. So I would in general advise to, when you're done with a project, just move on and look back at it to see what improvements you want to make with the next one. But in this case, fixing the faces didn't take too long, and it also taught me how I now like to stylize faces differently from when I first drew them. After this, now let's talk about how I added the backgrounds. I got inspiration for this through a mood board as well, and I tried some different things. In the end, I decided on just doing these simple gradients with one color, and finally I added these points, sparkles, and also a text with the name of the character. And that's how I finally was able to finish these 23 illustrations of some Genshin Impact characters with modern outfits. I will also have these illustrations as prints available if you really like one of them or multiple ones and would like to have them at home. You can check out my Etsy store, but other than that you can also just comment which of the designs you like the most or which of the tips I mentioned maybe is very important to you as well, or something you didn't really think about before. I hope you enjoyed the video and have a great day. Goodbye.